done by the Anunnaki to create us in their image and after their likeness.
They created man according to the Sumerian text.
5,000 years ago, the Sumerians wrote down exactly who could never be saved when they came back from the dead. And the list has nothing to do with sin, nothing to do with crime, nothing to do with the kind of person you were while you were alive. 7 categories, 7 types of people the underworld kept forever. And the reason each one was condemned will make you question everything you think you know about how ancient people understood death. So who were they? The law that cannot be argued. Here is the thing that doesn't fit neatly into any mythology documentary you've ever watched. The Sumerian underworld had nothing to say about whether you were good. The place was called Kurnugi, the land of no return, and it operated not on divine preference, but on something closer to physics, a cosmic principle so fundamental that even the most powerful goddess in the entire Sumerian pantheon couldn't negotiate around it. The principle was this: no soul could leave without a substitute entering. That wasn't a policy or a preference. That was the structure of the universe as the Sumerians understood it, carved into clay tablets long before most of civilization had figured out how to write anything down at all. Ereshkigal ruled Kurnugi from her palace, Ganzir, behind 7 gates, each guarded by her servant, Neti. According to Joshua J. Mark, writing for World History Encyclopedia, her name translates as Queen of the Great Below, and she was considered the most feared deity in the Mesopotamian pantheon. Not because she was cruel, but because she represented your final destination, and she hadn't chosen any of it. According to the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature at the University of Oxford, compiled from tablets dating roughly to the Ur-3 period around 2100 BCE, the cosmic prologue of the poem, Gilgamesh, Enkidu and the Netherworld, states that the Netherworld was given to Ereshkigal as a gift. She was assigned. She didn't apply. She is, in a very real sense, the first prisoner of the law she enforces. And that law didn't care who you were, which is proven by what happened to Inanna. Inanna was the queen of heaven, goddess of war, love, and political power, the most dynamic figure in the Sumerian divine assembly. According to World History Encyclopedia's account of her descent, Inanna descended into Kurnugi alive, possibly to claim the realm for herself after the death of Ereshkigal's husband, Gugalanna. She was stopped at all 7 gates, stripped of every emblem of her divine authority at each one, her crown, her robe, her measuring rod, her jewelry, until by the time she reached Ereshkigal's throne room, she had nothing left. The Anunna, the judges of the underworld, surrounded her. Ereshkigal fastened on her the eye of death. Inanna was turned into, as the text puts it, a corpse, a piece of rotting meat, cut and hung from a hook on the wall. Even her resurrection required a substitute. The Gala demons accompanied Inanna back to the surface, demanding a living soul to replace hers. Monsieur Choksi, writing for World History Encyclopedia, puts it plainly: the Mesopotamian netherworld was neither a place of punishment nor reward. The judgment performed on arrival was not ethical in nature. It was clerical, confirming categories, checking entries, running the ledger. So if the system doesn't care about innocence, what does it actually care about? Person 1 and 2, the body that rotted without ritual. 2 men die in the same battle on the same day for the same cause, and they end up in entirely different conditions below the earth. One sits on a cushioned seat, drinking clean water. The other drinks muddy water for eternity. The difference has nothing to do with valor or what they believed in. One body was recovered and properly buried, and one wasn't. And the Sumerians considered those 2 men to be living completely separate existences because of it. The Sumerians believed that the Atemu, the spirit or ghost of a dead person, retained all the physical needs of a living body: hunger, thirst, and longing. According to Monsieur Choksi at World History Encyclopedia, the Atemu was closely associated with the physical corpse, described in the texts as sleeping in the grave. Without that physical anchor, the Atemu drifted into conditions determined entirely by what the living were doing on its behalf. If the living weren't doing anything, the drift was always downward. According to the ETCSL translation from the University of Oxford, the catalogue of ghost documents exchanges between Gilgamesh and Enkidu after Enkidu returns briefly from the dead. Gilgamesh asks about the man who fell in battle. Enkidu's answer, his father and mother are not there to hold his head, and his wife weeps. Nobody performed the rituals. Nobody maintained the grave, and so the unburied soldier exists in a condition that mirrors exactly the abandonment he experienced in the moment of his death, stretched out across eternity. Person 2 is the man with no sons, and the mechanism that condemns him is the kispu, a monthly ritual of food and water offerings poured for dead ancestors at their graves or household shrines. According to Caden Pennell, writing for Spoken Past, the kispu was documented in administrative texts from Ur, Nippur, and Assur spanning more than a millennium. This wasn't a local custom. It was one of the most persistent institutional obligations in the ancient Near East. According to Misha Choksi at World History Encyclopedia, the primary responsibility for those offerings fell to the eldest son, and scholar Jo Ann Skurlock's work connects this directly to Mesopotamian property law. The eldest son received an extra inheritance share precisely because he carried this obligation. Daughters, when they married, transferred their kispum responsibility into their husband's family lineage, which meant a man with only daughters had no maintenance contract for his afterlife at all. The ETCSL text is meticulous about the progression. One son, the spirit weeps bitterly at a wooden peg in the wall. 2 sons, sits on bricks eating bread. 7 sons, sits as a companion of the gods, listening to divine judgments. The man with no sons eats scraps and crumbs tossed out into the street. Scholar Alhina Gadotti, whose critical edition of the Sumerian Gilgamesh cycle was published by De Gruyter in 2014, argues, as noted by Joshua J. Mark at World History Encyclopedia, that this catalogue wasn't literary decoration. It was a practical instruction text, a manual telling the living exactly what obligations they carried toward the dead. If your quality of existence after death is determined not by how you lived, but by whether your sons remember to pour water into the ground over your grave, does that change what you think a well-lived life actually means? Being unburied and having no sons are things that happen largely against your will, but the next 2 people introduce something different. One condemned because memory faded across generations, and one condemned not for anything he did to the underworld, but for the expression on his face on the wrong day. What kind of system punishes you for failing to grieve correctly? Person 3 and 4, the forgotten and the stolen. Person 3 had everything correctly arranged. He had descendants, a grave, and a family line that was supposed to maintain the kispu across generations. And then, gradually, they stopped. Not out of rebellion, but the way most things stop, through distraction, through distance, through the simple accumulation of time, until the ritual that was supposed to be monthly became occasional, then annual, then forgotten entirely. As it lapsed, his conditions in the underworld eroded with it. This is what scholars of Mesopotamian religion call the second death, and it's the part of the Sumerian system that is genuinely more disturbing than anything involving demons or judgment. It's the slow, invisible erasure of being remembered by anyone who would know to do anything about it. The etamu doesn't end. It slides incrementally the way a name disappears from a culture rather than from a single mind. Person 4 is where the story shifts entirely because Dumuzi didn't fade, he was seized. Dumuzi was Inanna's husband, the divine shepherd king, beloved enough that his death and return structured the Sumerian agricultural calendar for centuries. He did not break a single law of the underworld. He was condemned because when Inanna came back from the dead, she found him sitting on his magnificent throne, dressed in his shining garments, completely unaware of what she had just survived and what was walking behind her. According to Joshua J. Mark at World History Encyclopedia, the Gala demons went first to Inanna's faithful servant Ninshuba, found her in sackcloth, weeping in the dust, and passed over her. They went to the god Shara, found him grieving at Inanna's feet, and passed over him. Every person who had grieved for Inanna was untouchable by design. Then they found Dumuzi on his throne, dressed for celebration. conversation, and Inanna gave the Gala the eye of death and pointed at her own husband. The Gala are described in the Volkstein and Kramer translation as beings who know no food, know no drink, eat no flower offering, and never have children to kiss. According to a 2025 article on the Galu published by Malevus, the word may originally have referred to something recognizably human, someone who would not stop coming for what was owed. The Sumerians modeled their supernatural enforcers on the most terrifying, real-world human experience they could imagine. Dumuzi's sister, Geshtinana, loved him enough to offer to share his sentence, and the Sumerians built their seasonal calendar around what followed: 6 months below for Dumuzi, 6 for Geshtinana. Every winter, Dumuzi was underground. Every spring was his return. Person 4's condemnation was entirely transferred. Someone else's debt, someone else's return, someone else's finger pointing. But the 5th person had no one pointing at them. They walked into the underworld alive, were given precise instructions about what not to do, and did all of it anyway. So does the system have any obligation to release someone who broke its rules with full knowledge of what those rules were? Person 5, the one who broke the rules of the dead. Enkidu didn't descend into the underworld because of fate or tragedy. He went to retrieve something Gilgamesh had lost. 2 objects the texts call the Puku and Meku, which Andrew George, a professor of Babylonian studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, identifies as either a drum and drumstick or a ball and mallet. Before Enkidu left, Gilgamesh gave him a list of instructions so specific they read less like advice and more like a survival manual. Don't put on clean garments. Don't anoint yourself with fine oil. Don't carry a weapon. Don't put sandals on your feet. Don't shout. Don't kiss your wife. Don't kiss your son. The ETCSL records Gilgamesh's warning plainly. The outcry aroused would detain him in the netherworld. These weren't arbitrary taboos. They were a precise theology of difference, a description of every behavior that would mark Enkidu as belonging to the world of the living, in a place that was not for the living. Enkidu did all of it. He put on his clean garments, anointed himself with fine oil, carried his weapon, kissed his wife, kissed his son, and moved through the underworld the way a living man moves through the world, because he was a living man, and apparently found it impossible to suppress his own identity even when his life depended on it. According to the ETCSL, they recognized him as an alien, and then, without a named judge, without a specific demon summoned, the underworld seized him. Not Namtar, not any specific enforcer, but the realm itself, the same way gravity seizes anything that violates its terms. Caden Pennell, writing for Spoken Past, explains the theology this way. The underworld is a place of complete inversion, defined by the total absence of everything that marks living human identity. Once the gatekeepers recognize you as belonging to the world above, the bureaucracy notes your presence. It keeps you not out of malice, but out of the same mechanical logic that governs everything else in Kurnugi. Enkidu was eventually retrieved, but only through interventions unavailable to anyone without a legendary king's divine connections. According to Joshua J. Mark at World History Encyclopedia, Gilgamesh appealed first to Enlil, who refused, then to Enki, who agreed and commanded the sun god Utu Shamash to open a crack in the earth. Enkidu's ghost rose through that crack to speak. That rescue was a singular miracle, available once to one person, never repeated. The 6th person faced a tribunal that had never once issued an acquittal. So what does it take to be condemned by judges who don't measure guilt, only debt? Person 6, the tribunal that never acquits. When Inanna entered Ereshkigal's throne room, she had already been stripped of everything: her crown, her rod, her robe, her jewelry, taken at each of the 7 gates until she stood naked before the court with nothing left to invoke. The Anunna are the judges of the underworld, and it's worth being precise. They are not executioners or punishment figures. They are a divine judicial assembly that operates on one principle: recognition of debt. According to Joshua J. Mark at World History Encyclopedia, they served as Ereshkigal's judicial council, a body whose authority was collective and absolute. What they recognized in Inanna was not moral failure, it was a legal claim. She had been involved in the death of Gugalana, Ereshkigal's husband, and the underworld was owed. The judgment scene, as rendered in the Volkstein and Kramer translation, doesn't take long. The Anuna surrounded her, passed judgment, and then Ereshkigal fastened on Inanna the eye of death, spoke against her the word of wrath, uttered against her the cry of guilt, and struck her. No deliberation over character, no testimony, no weighing of good deeds against bad ones. The debt was recognized and collected. Scholar Dina Katz argues, in research cited in an undergraduate honors thesis on Mesopotamian death attitudes from Western Kentucky University, that the Anuna's authority transcends any specific physical location, that their power comes from divine mandate rather than geography. The implication is that there is nowhere a soul can go to be outside their jurisdiction. You cannot outrun a court whose reach isn't spatial. Inanna survived, but only because she had the foresight to leave precise instructions with her servant Ninshubur before descending, and because Ninshubur followed through perfectly before Enki finally agreed to help. The difference between salvation and condemnation in that tribunal was not innocence or righteousness, it was preparation. 6 categories, none requiring wickedness. But there is a 7th, and this one breaks the logic of every category that came before it, because this person doesn't arrive in the underworld at all. Ereshkigal cannot receive them. The Anuna cannot judge them. What happens to a person that the underworld itself has no category for? Person 7, the one the underworld refused. Near the end of the Catalogue of Ghosts, Gilgamesh asks Enkidu one final question. Did you see him who was set on fire? Every other entry begins the same way. I saw him, and here is how he fares. But for this one, Enkidu's answer breaks the pattern entirely. I did not see him. His spirit is not about. His smoke went up to the sky. The ETCSL records this passage across 3 separate manuscript versions, and they are consistent. The Urim version: his smoke went up to the sky. His spirit does not live in the underworld. The Mituran version: his spirit went up to the sky with the smoke. The Sumerians recorded that absence in multiple copies, as if they wanted to make absolutely certain the distinction was not lost. Understanding why requires understanding what the Etemu actually was. According to Monsieur Choksi at World History Encyclopedia, the Etemu was closely associated with the physical corpse, the substrate from which the spirit derived its continued existence. Without the body, the Etemu could not form, could not persist as a recognizable self. Fire didn't just destroy the body, it destroyed the foundation on which the spirit's existence depended, simultaneously and completely, leaving nothing the underworld systems were built to receive. Here is the inversion the entire script has been building toward. Every other person on this list feared Kurnugi the way you fear a sentence, the dust and darkness, the muddy water, the scraps in the street. But Kurnugi was continuity. To enter it was to still be, to still have needs, to still occupy a location in the structure of the universe. According to Joshua J. Mark's entry on Ereshkigal at World History Encyclopedia, she rules existence after death. But she cannot extend her reach to the 7th person, not because they were more powerful or escaped through cleverness, but because there was nothing left of them to reach. There is no existence here. There is only smoke, rising into a sky that doesn't record it. The worst fate the Sumerians could conceive was not torment, it was erasure, the simple, absolute absence of everything that had been you, with no one below to note your arrival because there was no arrival, and no one above to remember your name because the name had gone up with the smoke. Utro: 7 categories, 7 systems of condemnation, and not one of them required you to be wicked. That is what the tablets actually say. The Sumerians understood something we've mostly forgotten, that the afterlife wasn't earned. It was maintained by the living long after you were gone. Which of the 7 stays with you? Tell me below.